So if you're anything like I was when I went to a networking event, I was the wallflower in the room. I was not somebody that was engaging with anybody. In fact, I was looking for people that I knew, and I stuck next to them like glue the whole evening. Now, when I walked away from a networking event, I kind of just felt like, what did I gain from that? What was the value or purpose for me to actually attend those events? So, I'm going to share with you today 3 ways that you can improve how you engage at networking events and some bonus tips. So, the first thing that I would do before going to the event is prepare. So, doing some pre work will actually help you strategize and be really thoughtful with the time that you have at the event. So, what this looks like is when you're registering for the event, maybe find out if your friends or partners or colleagues in the industry that you're working within or that are interested in this event are attending. And maybe they can open up a door for you to engage and build a relationship with someone new. If you're lucky, most of the events that I've attended, you'll see that there's a registration list. Now, going through the registration list, you can sort by the company name, the title, or their name, and just find them on LinkedIn. I like to go and look on LinkedIn and say, hey, just message them directly and say, hey, I noticed that you registered for the event. I'm hoping to, meet you and connect. And people love to build relationships within the community. Now, the AEC industry is all based on relationships. So it's really important that you take the time to understand specifically what it looks like to build relationships and build connections that will last a lifetime. I have tons of friends that I've met at networking events that have been in my life in the most personal ways because we've connected and built a relationship at a networking event. And I also have built tons of relationships within the industry that have helped me grow professionally in my career. So that's the first thing to do. Don't be afraid. Just step out on a limb. Now, I would suggest to start small, because you don't want to say that you're going to connect with 10 people when you get there, because typically networking events are about 10 minutes or an hour and a half or 2 hours. So you want to be reasonable. How long the conversation is going to last, including any hellos and goodbyes added to that, and if there's a specific agenda for the evening. Now, usually there's a talk or speech of some sort, so you'll have to, subtract that from the actual time that you have to network. And then lastly, of course, you're going to bump into people that you might know, and that might take away from the time to build new connections and relationships with people that you didn't know before. So I would suggest starting with 3, the power of 3, starting with 3 new people for a networking event. Now, if you're really, just eager to get out there and build great relationships, I would suggest to stop at 5. Why? Because there's a lot that happens during the conversation when you're connecting with someone for the first time. So 3, looking at the registration list or connecting with your partners, friends, and other coworkers in the industry and asking them who is going to be at the event, top it at 3. Now, you've already made an introduction and you're going to the event, you're preparing yourself. You definitely want to, I like to think about at least looking 5 to 10% better than I would typically would, or if somebody else would go, not to show off or anything, but just to feel my best, right? Like I want to make sure that I'm feeling my best and I'm doing my best in that first impression. I can't tell you how many times I've met people in their first impression, and that usually does tell me a lot about who they are. And the same thing for me. When I'm meeting people, they later on down the road, they might say, oh, when I first met you, I thought this. When I realized that this was kind of consistent with not only my thinking, but also other people's thinking in the industry, I realized I need to really consider how I'm taking myself seriously. Now, this doesn't have to be anything, you don't have to spend a lot of money or anything like that. Just make sure your shirt and your top and bottoms are clean and ironed or steamed, or just make sure that you look good and right for the conversation that you have. Make sure that your face is clean. You just kind of hygiene. Okay. Just hygiene basics. I know this sounds really simple and silly, but at the end of the day, which is typically when a networking event occurs, you might just think like, oh, okay, I'm just going to go from work to the event. And just taking 10 minutes to go in the bathroom and just checking yourself before you walk into the networking event does wonders. Trust me. No, when you get to the networking event, I want you to get there early. Now, 5, 10, 15 minutes early before the event starts is the perfect time. Not only is it your time to get your registration and get your name tag, but also build relationships and connect with people that are setting up the registration table, or if they're pulling things off the car and setting it up in the room, go ahead and do that and help them out. Why? Because that is a connection that I consider that a connection, and so do they. They say like, Melinda was really helpful before the event, and I really appreciate that. And that seems to be such a small thing, but it goes a long way. Being service oriented and really focusing on building relationships with people outside of work, okay? And that's the tricky part about networking. You think, well, I need to go to a networking event and I need to talk about business. I need to get a deal. I need to talk about this job or this project that's coming down the pike. And the reality of the situation is when you go to a networking event, people don't want to talk about business. They want to talk about everything other than business because they just finished a long day of work, just like you. So what I would suggest is when you're doing your research, your pre-work before the event, is taking a look at their LinkedIn profile, seeing if they have dogs, kids, or, what their alma mater is, and if there's anything in similarity to who you are or who you know. And just making that connection and being prepared to have that conversation helps them be memorable to you when you see them, as well as start a conversation off on the right foot. So as you get there and people are starting to show up, make sure that you have your head up high, you're smiling, keep your smile on, of course, and say good morning or good afternoon or good evening, say hi, how are you, introduce yourself to people, and just be relaxed, right? Like just be relaxed. There's no show. You are not on stage. Just be yourself. And people love that because they're thinking the same exact same thing. I remember having a conversation with a very extroverted business developer, and he said, yeah, of course I get a little nervous before I walk into a room because I have to prepare myself. And that really struck out to me because it made me realize that even as an introvert, even as an extrovert, and I'm an introvert, we're both thinking the same thing before we walk into a room. And sometimes people will come with other people. If you can do that, great. But when you do get to the event, make sure that you separate and go meet new people, right? You don't stay and stick with the people that you know. You're building connections and building relationships. So as people are showing up and you start to see familiar faces, make sure you just kind of do the quick round and say hello, how are you, how are things, and quickly move on to the person that you have already planned to meet and connect with. Quickly move on. Or ask for an introduction from your circle of friends or connections. This is a really important tip because when you're going to a networking event, you're going to naturally feel like you need to be like right there with them. Like you need to be connected with them. And, it's great to say hello to people that you know, but you can't grow from that. Like in order to grow, you need to get to know different people. There's a rhyme in there somewhere. But, it's really important to take a step back and really think about, okay, why am I here? What's the purpose? Have an objective. And the objective is typically not to stay glued to somebody. It's to, make the rounds and let people get to know who you are. Because at the end of the day, you are a brand. Whether or not you recognize it, you are a brand. You are a brand. And it's important for people to get to know you and build that confidence and relationship with people that on the first go, it just happens that way. And it's so good and so powerful. Now, when you introduce yourself, you're going to want to make sure that you're letting everybody else speak before you do. If you can make that happen, do that. What that's going to do is to let you know specifically what the company they're working for, what they do, what their pain points are, if they mention it in conversation, and really listen to what's happening around you. Now, when it comes around, you get to be the person that actually speaks to their pain points or the connection. So say, for example, you're speaking to a principal at an architecture firm and your firm does engineering. Well, instead of saying I'm a marketing coordinator, you can say I work for an engineering firm that focuses on higher ed and higher ed design. And now if the architect works on higher ed design, now there's a connection. You don't even have to say the company name. If they ask for the company name, then that's even better because that's the second touch point. So the first time, hey, I just want to get to know you. Oh, what company do you work for? And then you get to tell them about the company. Now, if it leads even further, then they ask you what type of projects you're working on, or didn't you do that project with the other firm, or etc. You get to expound on that and just really share that with the person because they asked, not because you want to share it, just because they asked. Now, you might run into a situation where you don't have the answer, and that's okay. In fact, I like when I don't have the answer sometimes because I learn from those experiences, and not to mention it creates a new touch point. So it'll be like, well, Jane, actually, I don't know who worked on that project, but now that I have your business card or we're now connected on LinkedIn, I can now send that to you and let you know. So easy. So that's an easy way to follow up because they've given you a deliverable to follow up with. Now, when you're getting to the event and you're building and connecting the conversation, right? You're kind of meeting one person, they get to know, they introduce you to their circle of people, then you meet another person, you introduce them to your circle of people, and now the group becomes bigger, right? And that's usually when the introvert goes, oops, I don't want to talk. I want to tell you that there is a superpower in being an introvert. Listen to what's going on, what conversations are occurring, and just speak up where you're comfortable. If you're not comfortable yet, and you've gone through at least 3 or 4 people in the room or in the circle that you're on, and they've talked, then that's when you need to speak. So give yourself some permission to listen, but don't do it to the point where you're not talking at all. So I would say at least 20% of the circle that you're in. So if it's 10 people that are in that circle, then you'll allow 2 people to speak, and then now you need to speak. If it's smaller than that, you're going to want to engage in a conversation. And if you don't know anything about the topic that they're talking about, ask. This is a part of having conversation. Not knowing the answers and asking what they are is okay too. Like it's a part of conversation. You're not always supposed to have the answers for them or specifically know what they're talking about. You can simply just ask them. That's during the event. Now, have a normal conversation as you would if you go to a party or if you go to a gathering that's outside of a formal business attire outing. I would suggest just having conversations, within reason, right? No conversations outside of the office that you wouldn't have, but, making sure that it's light and it's not, focus on like politics, religion, this kind of like the gray area you do really want to step into unless you're comfortable doing that with the person that you're speaking to. But, just focusing on things that are light, like sports, kids, weather. Maybe it is a project, but it impacts like traffic or cars or anything that is like a generalized conversation to have with someone that you're just meeting. Now, during the event and when you're actually having this conversation with someone, there's 2 ways that you can really make the connection valuable. The first suggestion that I would offer you is to get their business cards. ask for the business cards. And I do this by not asking them. I say, may I give you my business card? Usually that's a transition to say, can I have yours in return? And that always works for me. And that's a quick way to get a business card. Now, if you want to take it a step further, you can pull out your phone and say, hey, do you know about the LinkedIn? I would love to stay connected with you, but do you know LinkedIn that you can pull up a QR code? Do you know how to do that? And they might say yes. If they do, then go ahead and scan it. If no, then go ahead and open your LinkedIn. And at the very top, I'm not sure if you can see, on the right-hand side here, there is that icon. It's a QR icon. And when you click on the QR icon, you'll see the QR code pops up. Now you can have the person scan it with their phone and they can go ahead and connect with you immediately. This is a great way to do it. Now, let me talk about the first way. The business card way is I love more than the QR code. The business card way gives me almost like a list of people that I need to follow up with when we'll talk about that in post-event conversation. But the QR code way, I have to be really on top of it to make sure that I'm connecting with the right people. Now, if you did your pre-work, you have messaged this person, and maybe you've already done the connection there. What I would do at this time is make sure that you're mentally keeping track of who you're connecting with. That's why I say 3 to 5, because after a while you start to meet a lot of people, and it's challenging to remember who's who, right? And what conversation occurred. So those are the tips that I can share with you about converting, so that now you have something in return after the conversation, and you can continue having a conversation from this point on. Now, post-event looks like you go on LinkedIn or email, or if you want to handwrite them a message, which is probably by far the best way to do follow-ups these days, because nobody does them, and who doesn't love a handwritten note? But if you're doing LinkedIn, a follow-up, then you're going to want to just say, quick message, and I can give you a template. In fact, I'll make sure to include a quick message template that you can fill in, but it'll just be like, hi, Jane, it was great meeting you the other night at the XYZ event. And I love learning about, your craft, your hobby of crafting, and I might, I'm planning on going to the fair that you suggested about crafting. We should keep in touch. And I either connect with them, I just send it. I can send that either LinkedIn or email, and it's really light. Now, I like doing it via email because they get to see my email signature. And on the business card, when I hand it to them, they're going to look at it, flip it over and back and over, and they're going to put it in their pocket, the purse, and it'll be done. If they're really good about post-event activities, then they'll follow up with me. But that, again, seeing my name and the company and the information that's tied to my signature, my email signature, is really important. And I have a headshot in my email signature, and that helps them remember who they just met. Like saying, hey, remember my face, remember me, it was great talking to you yesterday or last night or whatever that might be. So LinkedIn, email. Now, if you're going to send them a message, I would handwritten message, I would do the same. Don't worry about how clean it is or, how your handwriting is. Just make sure it's legible and mail it out immediately. And follow up with them. There is a message method to that. When you're sending out any snail mail, you definitely want to follow up with them if you haven't heard from them in about a week, because that's usually, a tell to you that they either received it and they haven't opened it, or they didn't receive it. And you just need to remind them, it's like, hey, I just want to touch base. I want to make sure that you received my note. It doesn't have to include anything. You just want to make sure that you've received it. And you can even chuckle about how snail mail is so terrible. So those are the tips and the strategy that I would suggest for you when you're going into a networking event. Even though you're an introvert, you can focus on building a relationship and really providing people value. And even if you're not the problem solver for that specific person you're speaking to, you can still be a resource. I love being a resource to people, even though they might not need proposal development or marketing strategy or brand development support services. I can at least connect them to a photographer that's amazing, or a speaking coach that's amazing, and still be a resource to them, and really valuable one too. And to keep me top of mind, they know to call me because I know a lot of people. There was actually a few weeks ago, I was talking to one of my coaches, and she mentioned to me that she went to two different events, totally different. One was for women entrepreneurs in the greater area, and then the other one was for American Heart Association. Totally two different things. And at both events, my name came up. And I was like, who, what? Like, who are you talking to? How do you know them? Like, I can understand the women entrepreneurs in the greater area, but American Heart Association. And I was like, who was at the event? And she was like, a whole bunch of doctors. I'm like, I don't know what doctor would know about me and my little agency. And so because I became a resource to so many different people, now they become marketers and advertisers for me. And it's not because I'm intentionally telling them to do so, but I've really gave them a lasting impression just by the engagement in the building the relationship that I had when we met. So I hope that this was really helpful. If you have any questions about anything that I covered today, go ahead and comment below. I'll make sure to include the template, just a few lines that you can use to follow up with the